And then the last point I want to make, the last example, would be sort of emotivism. This would be the last criteria, which isn't much of a criteria at all, but it's worth mentioning. It's basically the idea that there is no such thing as pseudoscience, and pseudoscience is just a term that has emotional meaning rather than cognitive meaning. Basically, it would be just like the skeptical theories, the demarcation problem. These are saying the word that pseudoscience doesn't have much or maybe any cognitive meaning and is really just thrown around as an insult to try to disparage other people's views without actually engaging with them. And this is worth asking because how would we know? We need to ask the question, how would we know that something is science versus pseudoscience? And if people are using the word pseudoscience without an actual strong definition or playing fast and loose with their definition of science and the demarcation problem, it's more likely that they're using pseudoscience to dismiss things that they don't agree with rather than actually using it in its proper way. Few people that have claims here's Lauden, if we would stand up and be counted on the side of reason, we ought to drop terms like pseudoscience and unscientific from our vocabulary. They are just hollow phrases which do only emotive work for us. And then here's McNally's term. The term pseudoscience has become little more than an inflammatory buzzword for quickly dismissing one's opponents in media sound bites. And Fask says this, philosophy of science still engages in time-consuming, unproductive discussions on already discarded demarcation criteria, such as falsifiability. So let me talk about where I think Fask has a point. He basically states that there's no historical case of pseudoscience turning into a legitimate science, but I would actually dispute him on this in the case that quantum mechanics and natural selection maybe initially were considered to be pseudoscience until they gathered broad acceptance. So once again, he's kind of assuming that pseudoscience had some nice definition before going forward on that. And then, but what he goes on to say is that fields like alchemy, astrology, and cold fusion were at some time considered science, but are now considered pseudoscience. So basically what he's saying is this should make us doubt that this term has some really distinct, easy black and white meaning, and perhaps it exists more along a criterion. And I would say, I do think saying science versus pseudoscience is a useful thing to say. I think we want to have a word for things where it's very clear that it's pretending to be science, but it's not, or it's trying to use the authority of science to convince people to do something or to push an agenda when it's clear that they're not following the rules of scientific methodology or the scientific method. But I think we need to be very careful when we use this term because it is a very strong term and it can sometimes lead us into an area where we're doing more rhetoric than actual good scholarship, or it's causing us to dismiss things that we should actually consider. So yeah, just taking a continuum approach. And Fask has these 4 criterion for pseudoscience that he gives. One is that it refers to entities and or processes outside the domain of science. 2, it makes use of a deficient methodology, so wouldn't be the scientific method, I think is kind of his point. 3, it is not supported by evidence. And 4, it is presented as scientific knowledge. So very similar to Hansen's definition, it's something that acts like it's science, but it's doing something else. And it's trying to pretend like it's science. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I have some discussion in the comments. And in the next video, I think I'll try to do a sort of case study. I'll pick something that's pseudoscience and give arguments for and against it. And yeah, we'll have fun with it. Anyway, see you in the next video.